Today's video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN, of whom more in a bit. The Piccadilly line has some of the best architecture on the whole of the London Underground. The modernist stations of Charles Holden are all bold shapes and angles, and represent transport design at its best. And today, I'm going to talk about the one they missed, North Ealing. North Ealing is on what's now the Uxbridge branch of the Piccadilly line, but it wasn't always. In fact, it was originally a District line station, or, to be more specific, it was on the Metropolitan District Railway. This particular line was all about the money. The Metropolitan District Railway, I'm just going to say district as apparently everyone else did, was set up in the 1860s to build the southern half of what's now the Circle Line, to create a railway connecting most of the major mainline stations in central London. But that was very expensive. A lot of land had to be acquired in the most desirable locations in London. So the district adopted a policy of extending out into the suburbs and to the towns outside the city, because building lines there was cheap, but brought in a lot of fare money from commuters. Even after the Circle Line was completed, the district kept this policy up because, well, they were still poor. In the 1870s, they'd started looking to the northwest, well, the northwest of London at least. In 1879, they got to Ealing, the station that's now Ealing Broadway. But the Great Western Railway was already there. The district needed a unique selling point. So they looked towards Uxbridge. The Great Western Railway was already there too, but their route was quite indirect. The people of Uxbridge were actually very much in favour of a decent rail connection into central London. Two independent proposals were made in the 1890s. One was called the Ealing and South Harrow Railway in 1894. Originally, this would have extended the district from Ealing Broadway to, well, South Harrow. But the GWR objected on the grounds that it was basically identical to their line, so the junction was moved back a bit, so it would come off the district's main line just before Ealing. The other line was the Harrow and Uxbridge Railway in 1896, which would have taken the district the rest of the way. While these were independent, the district backed them both, and the intention was that the resulting line would be run by them. One problem: money. The district's limited resources were being split between several different projects. Help would come from an unexpected source. Speaking of help from unexpected sources, have you noticed how expensive everything is these days? Well, of course you have, unless you're incredibly rich. But there are a couple of ways you can save money with the help of this video's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Let me explain. Surfshark basically uses advanced encryption to hide your identity online. But here's the clever part. Surfshark has servers in over 100 countries, and what that means is you can set your virtual location to any of those places. Now, when you're shopping online, you can get discounts if you're in a particular country. Set your location to that country and, oh look, a bargain. If you use a streaming service, and I think most of us do these days, you can use Surfshark to get access to their catalogue of content for other countries. And aside from all that, it's mighty useful for protecting your privacy and adding an extra layer of security when browsing online. You can even save money on Surfshark itself. Scan this QR code or follow this link, which is also in the description below, and as a viewer of this channel you can get 4 months extra free on top of a 2-year plan. And since Surfshark can be used on all platforms and unlimited devices, you can save a bundle. If only the District Railway could have taken advantage of that. Now, what was their unexpected source? The Metropolitan Railway were the district's great rivals. They too had their eyes on Uxbridge, and made a proposal. They would take the Harrow and Uxbridge over and build it themselves, with a connection to their own station at Harrow on the Hill. In exchange for this, the Metropolitan would give them the right to run trains to Uxbridge. It wasn't an ideal proposal from the district's point of view, but they were committed to an Uxbridge line and had no money to build it, so they reluctantly agreed. Construction began, but before the line was finished, another complicating factor would emerge. A gentleman from Chicago by the name of Charles Tyson Yerkes. Yerkes was looking to get into the public transport game in London and saw the district as an opportunity. At this time, the management of the district was seen as overcautious to the point of stagnation. The chairman at the time was James Stats Forbes, who'd been brought in to help the district manage its terrible financial situation. The opinion among many shareholders was that he'd done a great job there, but now it was time to be brave. Newer, more modern underground lines were emerging, and the district's mid-Victorian steam engines were looking positively antiquated. Yerkes promised better: to electrify the line and drag it into the 20th century. He and his investors bought the district out in 1901. Say what you like about Yerkes, and I certainly have over the years, but he knew a lot about electric trains. He brought experienced engineers with him from the States. The Ealing and South Harrow line was, in their opinion, the perfect test bed for electrification. A 4-rail electric system was put in place, and American-style electric trains were constructed. While the trains would have looked more at home on the Chicago elevated lines than in the countryside outside West London, the stops along the way were very much your typical British country stations. The rather domestic-looking North Ealing was a perfect example of the sort of thing. North Ealing opened on the 23rd of June 1903. Early passengers were, it has to be said, not super impressed. Despite the line being thoroughly modern and up-to-date, the lighting was considered poor, the coaches were draughty, and the ride was uncomfortable. Passengers weren't used to the concept of carriages where the seats had no armrests and there was so much space for standing passengers. There were frequent breakdowns, and the power supply was not always reliable. It should also be noted that there weren't many passengers. You wouldn't think it to look at the area now, but back then this was out in the countryside. What Yerkes had found in America was that where his streetcar lines ran, suburbs sprung up around them. Well, of course he hadn't planned the original course of the Ealing and South Harrow. The choice of this particular line for electrification may well have been driven by the assumption that something similar would happen. He'd never lived to see that take place, though, as he died in 1905. The fact that there wasn't much around him might also account for the name. Subsequent development has meant that the actual North Ealing is more towards Hanger Lane, but that wasn't the case in 1903. Problems with this service weren't limited to the trains themselves. The District Railway had overstretched. At the western end of their line, they had branches to Wimbledon, Richmond, Ealing, Hounslow Barracks and South Harrow. The South Harrow branch served the least populated area, so that got the short straw when it came to train services. In the early 1920s it had one through train from central London an hour at peak times, as compared to Ealing getting 9, Richmond getting 5 and Hounslow getting 4. Off-peak it got no through trains, with the only train service at North Ealing being shuttle trains between South Harrow and Ealing Common, Acton Town, or the now-closed South Acton. The other reason for their lack of motivation, re the South Harrow line, was competition. The Metropolitan had agreed to let the district run to Uxbridge, but they didn't make it easy. Other stations were in areas served by other railway companies, our old friends the Great Western Railway, as well as the London, Midland and Scottish and the London and North Eastern Railway. North Ealing itself was up against the GWR's Park Royal station, which isn't there anymore. Fortunately, there was a solution. Yerkes hadn't just bought the district. His organisation, Underground Electric Railways of London, had bought a number of other planned tube schemes. One of these was the Great Northern Piccadilly and Brompton, a line from Finsbury Park in North London to Hammersmith in West London. This line, better known as the Piccadilly Railway or the Piccadilly Tube, had plenty of spare capacity. This was the solution: extend it from Hammersmith and run it on to the Hounslow and South Harrow branches. It would skip a number of the District Line stations along the way, running as an express service as far west as Acton Town. It may sound quite simple, but in reality it was a complicated and expensive process, only possible thanks to a government loan in 1929. New track needed to be laid. Signalling and power supplies needed to be upgraded. At North Ealing, this took the form of a new electrical substation. At the same time, the area around the line was finally starting to see some development. It was therefore necessary for new stations to be constructed along the branch. Not at North Ealing, though. Why this one alone was skipped, I have not been able to find out specifically. What I do know is that in the early 30s, development was concentrated more towards where Park Royal Station is now, so perhaps they didn't anticipate the same thing happening here. In February 1932, the first Piccadilly Line trains started running along the South Harrow branch, and in July that year, the District Line service ended. Back then, you couldn't get a train to Uxbridge from North Ealing, and the reason was, if you'll forgive the legal terminology, the Metropolitan Railway were being massive jerks. They wouldn't let Piccadilly Line trains on the line from South Harrow to Uxbridge. But since legally they had to let District Line trains in, there was this bizarre situation where Piccadilly Line passengers had to change trains at South Harrow, then they'd get a District Line train to Uxbridge. A District Line train that used almost none of the District Line. Well, the Piccadilly Line would get the last laugh the following year. The whole Underground network, including the District, Piccadilly and Metropolitan Railways, would come under the umbrella of London Transport in 1933. The empire of Underground Electric Railways of London was the largest component of this new organisation, and you can bet they weren't going to take any ranny-gazoo from the Met. And so, from October 1933, just 3 months after the new management took over, Piccadilly Line trains ran through North Ealing to Uxbridge. There was a little bit of messing around in the 1930s. The Piccadilly had an odd policy of speeding up services by having trains skip some stations. Well, that wasn't odd in itself, that's very common on railways in fact. But some trains would skip some stations, while other trains would skip others. In the late 30s, they started doing this with stations on the Uxbridge branch. This did speed services up, but at the expense of passenger convenience. Trains would carry a board indicating that they were skipping stations, but not which stations. If you were unlucky, you might end up zooming right past your destination. In 1947, this mode of operation was abandoned. Since then, North Ealing has continued very much as is. Technology has been upgraded for sure, but if a time traveller from 1903 were to materialise here, they'd recognise it instantly. Well, I suppose they could read the sign that says North Ealing, but, even if they couldn't. I'm overthinking this, aren't I? Plans were announced to make the station step-free by 2022, but that hasn't happened. It is a very steppy station indeed. That aside, it's a station with a lot of charm. It's perhaps ironic that one of the best examples of a district railway suburban station isn't even on the District Line. I do hope you enjoyed this unrebuilt tale from the tube. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your support. You are the wooden shelter to my unsheltered platform. Thanks also to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Click on the link down below to take advantage of their generous offer. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.